Hey, my name's Andrew, and today we're checking out the XERO ALPINE. This is a heavy-duty winter barefoot boot, and unfortunately, I don't have any winter yet in New York. It's a little too early, but we're just gonna check out the features, and I'm just gonna tell you about my first impressions, taking it out, what it feels like, how it fits, etc. I've written down some notes, and yeah, we're just gonna hang out. But I'm also gonna release a full review for this when I actually do get some snow and some ice and some more nasty conditions to test it with. But yeah, let's get started. So probably first off, this actually has a pretty wide toe box. Sometimes people complain about barefoot boots not being wide enough, but this, especially for a winter boot, has a ton of room. And I was able to stuff a pair of Injinjis plus a smart wool over that, and I probably could have put more in there. And yeah, it was super warm, super cozy, super roomy. And the other thing I like is that it's got a ton of room, like for your instep. If you're someone with higher arches or someone who just likes a little bit more room for your foot to flex as you're walking, yeah, these probably have the most room for the instep I've ever seen for a barefoot shoe or a barefoot boot. And even the front, they're pretty high as well. Like sometimes you get that crimping from a shoe that's a little bit too narrow. Like if you look at sometimes Vivos have like those lower sculpted toes, and you can get, a little bit of pressing here. So that's also really good. In terms of the upper, it is fully waterproof. None of this mamsy-pamsy water resistant. Like this will keep out anything. It's got a fleece lining, so it's not quite as warm as wool, but the advantage of synthetic linings is that you can wear them to a little bit higher temperature versus wool, where if you get above like 40 degrees, your feet are going to start sweating like crazy because they're just so freaking warm. And like I said, with synthetic, you can take a couple pair of wool socks and make your own DIY insulation basically for a lot less money than you would spend on a fully wool boot or shoe. Yeah, so side straps for a little more stability. I've got a wrap around guard here to prevent tear outs and just damage to the side of the boot. Underneath, these things have a crazy good grip. This is going to be really good for ice, any kind of slippery conditions, snow, etc. There's enough space in here where this can really grip no matter what you're walking on, any kind of soft ground. But then in the front, here you can see, and then the back, it's also got a little bit more flat lugs, so you can walk on the road with this. I found it to be like a little more on the stiff side just because of how thick the sole is, but there are actually some advantages to that, which we're going to cover. But just to give you a sense of what the flex looks like, vertically it's actually really good for how thick this boot is. You can basically fold it in half. Horizontally, yeah, we got to turn around. Horizontally, yeah, not too much, but if you're going diagonally, it's not bad. So I would say this definitely feels like a heavy duty boot, and for just like casual walking, it's probably going to be overkill unless you're walking on snow or ice, which if you're in a nasty climate like Rochester, New York, you're probably going to be doing a lot of. So getting to that, when you're walking on an unstable surface like snow or ice, like a thin barefoot boot is really not the best thing to have. For example, like with the Vivo Barefoot Gobi, if you're walking on ice where it's just like all over the place, your foot's just gonna do this, It's not like walking on the ground where it's very pleasant, a very pleasant, flexible experience. When you've got like jagged ice and your foot's going all over the place, like it just gets really tiring really fast. And yeah, my plantar fascia has gotten quite tired. Like it can be a recipe for plantar fasciitis if if you're wearing too thin of a boot on really unstable conditions. Yeah, so the other thing that these are really useful for would be snowshoeing, because they've got so much structure that if you've got like the rubber straps for your snowshoes, it's going to hold it in place and it's not going to put pressure on your foot, versus if you have a really thin shoe like that, the straps are going to be constantly trying to bend the shoe in half and it's not going to work very well. So a really good snowshoeing boot. Another thing that's really good for snowshoeing about these is that with a snowshoe, like you usually have that fabric in the middle and it just kind of bends in like that. There's really no, stability. You have the the frame around there, but there's nothing holding your foot in place. So a more stable boot like this is going to prevent your foot from, you know, sinking way into the boot or sinking way into the snowshoe. So it's nice to have something like that that gives you just a little bit of support without being too stiff like a regular boot and clunky. Speaking of thick and clunky, compared to my regular boots, I guess I don't have them, but they're like half the weight. I think, okay, here we go. I wrote it down. So the Alpine is 431 grams and a regular snow boot is 860 grams. So this thing, even though it looks like a heavy duty boot, it is half the weight of a normal snow boot. And it feels like it, you know, like when I put my old snow boots on, it's like, oh God, I can't believe I ever wore those. They're so clunky and heavy and stiff. And one last thing that I want to mention, I recently went to a soccer game and it was freezing cold. It was like 35 degrees and like half raining, half snowing. And I took the Gobies, which was a huge mistake because they have a super, super thin sole. And the cold from the bleachers just went straight up into this boot. So that's a third scenario. So ice, snowshoeing, and then just kind of like standing or sitting around would be three places where a thicker boot like this would be really helpful because it's got a 9mm sole. So there's a lot more insulation between you and whatever's cold underneath you. And the Alpine also comes with a heat reflective insole, which I've had for Vivo Barefoots before. And it's basically like space blanket material insole in here. So it reflects the heat straight up back towards your foot, and then it reflects the cold away from you. So yeah, overall, I think a good boot for some hardcore conditions like ice and snowshoeing and just standing around. Like if you were a security guard, probably a really good security guard boot where you're just standing around in icy puddles and you can't walk around too much to warm yourself up. So yeah, those are my thoughts from testing it so far. Yeah, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll post a full review on the Alpine when we get some nasty conditions. Peace.